All right, welcome everybody to the Lakers Legacy podcast. Where Wolves? How about where's the foul wolves? Because that's all the T Wolves and their fan base kept crying about last night. And as it turns out, the big bad wolf can dish it, but can't take it. But the series and the fight has only just begun. I'm your host, Jonathan Hernandez, and I am joined by my co host, Tommy Alexander. And Tommy, the Lakers have tied the series up 1-1 versus the Minnesota Timberwolves by ratcheting up the physicality, ratcheting up their defensive intensity, and holding the Timberwolves to a season low 85 points for an opponent. Before we get long winded and dive into the nitty gritty, though, why don't you give me your play of the game from last night, whether it was a play that involved the entire team or a specific player? Could be offensive, could be defensive. What's your quote unquote play of the game?
This is probably a lot of people's play of the game, and it wasn't like a super, highlight reel type of play, but I think it won us the game. I mean, it was that play where after a timeout, it's late in the fourth quarter. After a timeout, we drop a play. Luca comes in and immediately turns it over on a pick and roll drive, right? And it starts transition the other way. And at this point, the Wolves already have momentum. We had a hard time scoring in the fourth, and Anthony Edwards is pushing the ball down the other side. LeBron comes out of nowhere and like Jose Alvarado's him and steals the ball and takes it down and goes in for a layup, and that sort of solidified the game for us, I think, on that play.
Yeah, that play was huge. It was a literal turning point. Could have been an easy bucket in transition for the Timberwolves. Instead, it was an easy bucket for LeBron and the Lakers. I forget if it was Luca or Austin Reeves who turned the ball over. Regardless, LeBron swooped in and saved the day. Um, I think for me, my play of the game came with about at the 149 mark of the fourth quarter. Lakers were up 11 at this point. Julius Randle was backing Luca down in the post, and then all of a sudden he like hooks Luca and he springs free and has an open lane to the basket. Looks like he's going to go up to dunk it or easily lay it in. And then Rui Hachimura swoops in out of nowhere for the help and bats the ball down, gets a recorded block for that. And the Lakers get the rebound and take it down the other way. And that's my play of the game because it was kind of indicative of Rui's overall defensive night, and it was a nice punctuation mark to all of his defensive activity. And it was almost like a mic drop exclamation moment for Rui to just bat Julius Randle's ball down and then just calmly shrug his shoulders and run down the other way. So that was my play of the game. All right, with that said, huge Lakers win last night. It was essentially a must win after dropping the first game on Saturday. You were actually at the game. You can kind of let us know how it felt at crypto. But before we get into the specifics of the defense and the adjustments that the Lakers made, we can keep this portion short. But how are you feeling about last night's win as a vibe? And I guess how are you reconciling what you saw in game one with what you saw in game two? And because to me, and according to JJ Redick as well, one thing was very clear. The effort, energy, and engagement between both games coming from the Lakers players was completely different. And it sort of resembled more of what we saw from the team the last 2 weeks of the season before they had like a week off against top competitors like the OKC Thunder than it resembled like game one. So from your end, how are you feeling vibe check wise? And now that you have like a sample size of 2 games, how are you feeling about this series?
So obviously you get the win. That feels good. I will say I'm not from a vibes perspective, I feel more concerned about this series than I did before it started. And I think that's like the net effect of games one and two. So game two, obviously we got the win. It's tied 1-1. But I don't know that I saw enough in game two to counteract sort of the bad from game one. So, you mentioned it. I was at game one. I think like a few comments generally, the crypto crowd got kind of a bad rap, I feel, after that game for not being very engaged. My view was it was actually pretty loud in there. I mean, I've been to several games over the years. This was actually only the second or third playoff game I've ever been to. There were moments in that game in the first quarter, in the third quarter, where we made that fake run at the end. That was sort of highlighted by Luca hitting that half court shot to end the third quarter. Um, it was loud in there. The fans were like looking for anything to cheer for. It's just the guys didn't come out with the effort to give them anything to cheer for. And you know, I said it after game one. Well, we said it before game one. I said it to you after game one. Um, we did not come out with the intensity and physicality, not just that the Timberwolves brought, but that pretty much every other playoff team brought. We were not the first game. There were 3 games before us. There were 4 games the next day. Essentially, and I watched most of those, right? Or at least caught significant portions of most of those. I'd say that the only team that looked softer than us in the first round was Memphis, and I'm seriously at both conferences, and that's not just the fact that they lost by 50, but just the way that they looked and the way that they couldn't seem to take a punch from OKC. I think we looked kind of like that. We came out in the first quarter, we were up 28-21. Luca had like 18 points in the first quarter. We made 7 threes in the first quarter. You very much got the sense from our guys' body language and effort and overall hustle that they sort of thought that they were just going to be able to play their style of ball and Minnesota was going to roll over. Obviously that didn't happen. Minnesota punched us really hard in the mouth, and it felt like the rest of the game we were just trying to stand back up. That
Yeah.
was the concern that I had going into the game, and it's what happened. Right now in the second game, we did match the intensity. The question that I have, right, and I think this is a fair one, and probably the question that most people have with this team, given our relative lack of depth, can our top 7 guys or 8 guys, we're sort of using Vando slash Goodwin as our 8th guy in the rotation. Um, can our top 8 guys maintain this level of physicality? Forget about this series, right? But it's like if we win this series, we're going to be matched up with most likely. I mean, I guess we'll see what happens with the Golden State Houston series, but seems like potentially Golden State, who's also playing an extremely physical brand of ball right now, with OKC or the Clippers, who are both playing extremely physical brands of ball right now. Like, how many times is this group going to be able to do this?
I
Like,
don't think they can look at it that way, though. I understand your concerns as a fan, but we kind of have to just take things game by game if this team wants to do anything. So it's not forget about this series. I don't even know. Like to your point, who knows if we make it out of this series? We
right,
we
right.
figure it out at the end of the day how sustainable this is. But this is playoff time. This is go time. We saw this a similar version of this team, except with Anthony Davis, do this against the Denver Nuggets. And at least we're ahead of the game in that respect with regards to tactical manipulations from game to game. So, I mean, you can go ahead and finish your thought about just like, I think the sustainability aspect of it is a very fair point.
Yeah. So that's like really the concern. And I think the concern was sort of highlighted for me. Um, not I mean, highlighted maybe the wrong word, but sort of, flagged for me by that sort of famous JJ Redick timeout that's been going around where in the third quarter where he like
Jesus
called
Christ! Jesus
he's
Christ! What the
yeah.
F is going on?
Yeah, exactly. Where he like called the timeout and stormed the court and started like berating everyone. I mean, that was needed, right? But in my opinion, I think that's the difference, between us and the Wolves in this series. And I'm not saying that's the difference between us and every team. Certainly, the difference between us and the Wolves in this series is like we don't need a coach, or sorry, we need a coach to do that. We had 2 quarters of extremely, extremely intense physical ball, We went into halftime and we came in the third and we were not at that level again. So, obviously JJ calling the timeout and that reinvigorated us. And, look, that's coaching, that's in-game adjustments, that's everything that JJ's here to, do in theory. So that's all fine. It's not an issue that he had to do it per se, but it does highlight sort of the mental, I think, I don't want to call it mental weakness of the team, but like this team did not play an 82 game season slapping people around like Minnesota did. Minnesota's game, like Minnesota knows, I mean, maybe their fans don't know this because some of the takes you read online are crazy, but their only chance to win this series is by playing a physical series. I mean, if they don't beat us into wins, they're going to lose a finesse game 9 out of 10 times. I mean, if they want to get into a finesse, who can play better one-on-one, don't hand check and grab Luca for 90 feet every single possession, obviously we're going to win. And that's not a knock on them. That's just their style. You know, I think it's a fair question and why people sort of thought this about this matchup going into it. But I think it's a fair question of, are we going to be able to sustain that? So, the second half of game 2 didn't give me a ton of encouragement on that front. I mean, we won, like I said, we won the game. We were able to hang on. But we played, LeBron played 42, Luca played 42. This is all fine, but you know, they were clearly, and I'm not going to say it was just our guys. Minnesota was gassed at the end of that game too. I, but we were gassed. We do have rest in this series between games. We're not playing back to backs. That obviously helps us, but we also just don't have the depth. I mean, if Rui Hachimura gets in foul trouble, what's the game plan? Like if
Sure.
DFS. I mean, these guys are like not our top 3 players, but they're playing almost. I mean, Rui's playing. He got injured yesterday, so his minutes were down. But it feels like the goal is to play him in the 35 to 40 range. DFS is playing in the 35 to 40 range. Um, what happens if one of those guys gets into foul trouble? I don't know,
So
right? So I think those are the things that are sort of giving me pause about the matchup still. And we'll see. I mean, look, I temper all of this with the counterpoint, which is we have yet to see a good outside shooting game from LeBron and Austin, which you figure in a 7 game series is coming at least once. We haven't had a game like the Timberwolves did in game 1, where one or more of our role players just have an outliery kind of good performance, like McDaniels and Nas Reed did in game 1. The Timberwolves have gotten, like, I mean, I don't want to say career best numbers from Julius Randle so far, but I mean, like, look at his playoff history, and his stats, and look at his stats this year. They've gotten very, very good output from
sure.
Julius Randle. So there are some things that have sort of swung in their favor and things that haven't swung in our favor. And you figure in a 7 game series, some of that stuff will, sort of even out over time. But yeah, that I think what it comes down to me is, 2 things. Can we sustain the effort? But also, are we going to, like, what is the refereeing going to be like in this
Yeah.
series? Because if it's like game 2 and like, game 1, I mean, again, I think I had no problem with the refereeing in game 1 either. And I just think Minnesota was much, much more physical than us. In game 2, we matched that physicality, in my opinion. But then you have all these people crying about how, like, we, we got a really good ref game in game 2. And I'm like, okay, we were called for more fouls and gave up more free throws and we were the home team. I don't understand that really. So
Yeah.
and I know these are all narratives that are sort of irrelevant to the what's actually going to happen on the court, but it is floating in my mind. Are the referees going to continue to allow this level of physicality because, at least by both teams, because of how sort of, I don't want to say dirty, but like there were some plays like the Jaden McDaniels trip on Luca.
Mhm.
There are some plays where it's like guys are getting kind of borderline close to crossing the line here, and if they're
Yeah.
calling Minnesota for fouls, Minnesota has no chance of winning this series. So, how are they going to equalize it? I guess is going to be my question. And I don't know. And so, the problem is the matchup is so close that that is going to be a factor, which is unfortunate. But anyway, I know that was a long thought, but that's sort of where I stand.
No, I mean, I think your concerns are fair just because I think on paper and the way, I guess the vibe and the feel of this series, the grittier and chippier it gets, like that just naturally fits Minnesota's ethos, right? And it is getting very chippy. And my biggest concern with the reffing is, even though people always like to say, oh, it's default gonna like side the Lakers' way, is like the consistency or lack thereof as the series progresses. Because I think LeBron
Yeah,
had
yeah,
like started yelling at some point last night where he's like, oh, now you're going to call the foul when you didn't call it that way, like the same way on the other end. So I think we're going to get a lot of that from both parties, you know, the chippier and chippier it gets, like who will prevail, who will continue to get more physical, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, people are saying like, oh, the Wolves got, you know, had so many people in foul trouble. Like, I don't know, Jackson Hayes got 3 fouls, and some of this is his fault, but like some of them too, I was like, why is Jackson getting called for that when people are getting, you know, hurt on other plays? You know, Rui's getting smacked on the face and having to leave for a portion of the game. And so, yeah, I think the consistency of the calls is going to be interesting to monitor. I will say, with regards to your concerns, though, I felt like in the second half, the Lakers' offense really sputtered, and it was their defense after that timeout that really held up, which was what I was really encouraged about. And at one point, the Lakers were up by 20 points, and they were up by 20 in the third, I believe. And for me, I guess I'm taking a more optimistic viewpoint because I like dove into their defensive tape and their game plan, and none of this doesn't, like, the way that they crowded people, the way that they looked so interconnected. To me, this just reminded me of the Lakers team that we saw when Luka first came here and right before Luka suited up. Like,
yeah.
I've seen these
I
guys
agree.
do this for a significant stretch. It was only when Rui got hurt, Austin got hurt, LeBron got hurt, that everything got disjointed, you know? So that's what kind of gives me confidence that we can keep it up. Whether we can keep it up against, like, as smash 'em bash 'em bros a team as the Timberwolves, with the refs also being an interesting factor, is a fair question. But so far, I honestly think that the Lakers just needed that wake up call game one because they were off for like a week,
Yeah,
almost a week and a half, and they did their job to close the season as the number 3 seed. And honestly, I will side with JJ Redick here. Game one seems like a total aberration. And Tommy, you mentioned a bunch of things about how, you know, we haven't gotten that bang out game from Austin Reeves and LeBron James. The way these guys are playing, I'm not sure we'll ever get a bang out offensive game. I think their legs are shot, you know? We're just going to have to sort of like brawl this out. And I think the Lakers are up to the challenge. If the next most important thing is they need to split one of these two. I'm saying the obvious thing, right? But they need to split one of these next two games in Minnesota so that we can sort of
yeah,
regain home court advantage. After that, I think we're going to be okay, because the one thing I don't think anybody will question that the Minnesota Timberwolves are more physical, they're taller, they're more athletic, more explosive, etc. But the baseline that the Lakers showed, you know, maybe our ceiling is more of the Timberwolves median in terms of physicality, but I think what the Lakers have that the Timberwolves don't is just higher basketball IQ and ability to adapt. Like game 2, and like we held the Timberwolves to 14 assists, which is crazy. We held them to 15 points in the first quarter. Luka outscored them all on his own, 16 points to 15 points. After game 1 where they hit, I forget how many threes they hit, like 23s, right? We held them
21.
to 5 threes
Yeah,
last night. Maybe things shake out and we get them to around, you know, 11 or 12. It doesn't matter. Like, I thought that the game plan and the execution that the Lakers showed defensively was superb, and just the interconnectedness and focus that everybody on the court who played brought, except for maybe Jackson Hayes, for he was getting really frustrated by the foul calls and all that stuff. But even him on some plays, you could tell like these dudes really did their homework between games 1 and 2, and they executed it for the most part. And I actually don't blame them too much for the offensive slump off in the second half, because naturally, when you're playing that hard defensively, I don't know. You're going to have lapses on the offensive end. You maybe even have lapses on the defensive end. And for me, it was just like, I never really felt that the Lakers were out of control in this game. And, one or two threes go their way and they really blow the doors off of this game to close it. But before we dive any deeper into the specifics of this game, let's first take it to break, because I do want to talk about like the specific adjustments that the Lakers made and highlight some standout players. But before we do that, let's first talk about our sponsors for today, Underdog Fantasy. Now that we've entered the home stretch of the basketball season, when your favorite stars score buckets, we are alley-ooping you an opportunity to win money from watching sports with Underdog. To play, simply choose whether a player will go higher or lower on one of their stats, i.e., points, assists, rebounds, and more. You can play with as little as $1, and if you get everything right, you can win up to $1,000. You can win up to 1,000 times your money. So turn $1 into $1,000 just with your hoops knowledge. Millions of fans have already won billions making picks on Underdog. Their app has over 100,000 five-star reviews and millions of players, so don't miss out on all the fun. So I took a quick look at the contest for Game 3, Lakers Minnesota Timberwolves on Friday, and I keyed in on LeBron James 22.5 points. Tommy, would you go higher or lower on that stat for Friday's game?
22.5. Oosh. I'll say higher.
Yeah, for me, I'm 100% going higher just because LeBron actually hasn't hit that mark in the first two games.
Yeah, that's what I was
He had
thinking.
he had 19 points, 21 points. This dude is due. He's yet to have a bang out offensive game where he kind of takes over, and on the road in hostile territory, trying to take back home court. I think this is when he does it. So I will go higher, 22.5 points on LeBron James for Friday's game. So if you're thinking the same way, then follow the king and download the Underdog Fantasy app and sign up now using the promo code Legacy to unlock a special offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you make your first deposit. Join in on the fun when you sign up with promo code Legacy, claim your special offer today, and get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly upon first deposit. Must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. All right, let's pitch it to our sponsors, and when we return, let's talk about the Lakers' defensive uptick and highlight some particular players as well. All right, so we are back. So yeah, to your point earlier, Tommy, about the Timberwolves fans crying foul, the Lakers, sorry, the Timberwolves literally went to the line more than the Lakers, 25-20. And I know this is not an accurate way to decide, the foul calls and whatnot. But just to point out, there was nothing egregious about the Lakers going to the line. In fact, the craziest thing is that the Lakers shot 20 of 20 from the free throw line. I'm not sure the last time they did that, but that is very impressive for this team. And I think the Timberwolves also won all of their challenges as well. And then when it comes to fouls called, the Lakers were called for more fouls than the Timberwolves, 24-22. So again, nothing egregious. If anything, physicality was happening on both ends of the court. Rui got smacked the hell in the face, had to leave the game for portions of the game. Austin got dropped to the floor on a Naz Reid screen. Luka got tripped once or twice and was bleeding from his knee again. Like, look, this is going to be a physical series, so everybody just strap in and deal with it. There are going to be inconsistencies on both sides of the ball. And yeah, that's where we'll leave it on the foul section of things. But with regards to the Lakers defense, what schematically did you see that the Lakers did in your eyes beyond up the intensity? Although I think that is a huge part of it. But for me, I just thought there was a lot more purposeful and intentional movement around the court, a lot more focus and motor combined with more interconnected movement and communication amongst all the players. We were contesting out to shooters much better. We were crowding them and kind of using the baseline and sideline out of bounds as an extra defender. We were pressuring dudes at the point of attack and bodying them up, moving our arms and hands like windmills to harass them. We were pinching them out to the sidelines and always forcing them up almost near the logo, the half court line, to the point where by the time they were able to get the ball in the middle of the court, there was only like 8 to 10 seconds left each time. And uncoincidentally, Jaden McDaniels did not go 11 of 13 from the field again, Tommy. He went 3 of 11. And then I just felt like, as it usually is the case, LeBron sort of helped lead the charge with regards to setting the tone defensively because he was kind of everywhere. He was helping, he was rotating. When you saw him switched onto guys, he was in that perfect low crouch and his arms were moving everywhere. When guys like Rui see that, they're going to mimic what LeBron does. And the fact that Luka was also doing some of those same things, look, he's going to get blown by, but I thought Luka did a great job switching onto players, rotating, and then at least giving ball handlers that first body blow bump that he likes to do. They're gonna get past him eventually, but he at least puts in that like hip check or that chest check to make them feel him so that the help behind him can recover pretty easily. And so for me, the helping, the traps, the pressuring at the half court line, and then the frenetic and rabid way each Lakers defender would stay locked in after switches was super palpable and tangible. And then because Jackson Hayes was in foul trouble, I just really appreciated the gang rebounding that the Lakers had. Like dudes were just flying in out of nowhere. Like LeBron would have like his whole body leveraged against Rudy Gobert. So just trying to keep him out of the paint. And whenever a ball would bounce off of the rim, LeBron couldn't get that ball, because he's trying to handle Rudy Gobert. But every time that happened, like Rui and DFS would all of a sudden sky in, if not to secure the rebound, just to tap it around so that somebody else could secure it. And so I just felt like the Lakers rebounding engagement was also there and super inspiring to watch. But yeah, whether it's schematics or something you saw just eye test wise, what did you see from the Lakers defense?
Three quick things. One, I'll just build off your rebounding point. We're not going to win the ball comes to me rebounding because we're
Mm-mm.
smaller and not as long. What we have to win and what we did, and what I think we've said multiple times, right? And what we certainly did during that stretch you were referencing from what I'll call February 1 to March 8th, because I was looking at this recently, right? It was like February 1 was the game after AD got hurt. So those numbers don't factor in AD. And most of that stretch, we had Luca. I think Luca started playing for us 12 days later, right? So a few of those games we didn't have Luca, but most of the majority of the games in that stretch we had Luca, and for none of those games we had AD. What we were doing on the rebounding perspective is, or from a rebounding perspective, is what we did last night. When the ball, we might not grab the ball, we might not be the first one up there, like we might not have the two hands on the ball at first, but we muck it up, and that's all we
Mm-hmm.
can do. And we have so many guys. LeBron has really strong hands. Luca has really strong hands. For all the flack he gets for his lack of defense, his ability to pull a ball out of a crowd of like seven people is like
Yeah.
remarkable. And so we have a few guys who can do that. So as long as DFS, Rui, Gabe, even Austin, when he can, like as long as those guys are knocking it around, it doesn't matter that Gobert is 7-2. You know what I mean? We'll have once the ball is loose, we have enough guys who could scramble and try to get it. That was one. The second was picking up, I won't say picking up full court, but extending our defensive pressure.
Yeah.
We weren't just starting to guard guys when they got to the 3-point line. We were pushing guys, and you know part of this is, we don't have great point of attack defenders, but as we've seen in this series, they are allowed, and not just our series, by the way, all playoff series. Watch another game. Don't look at a box score, talking to the fans out there. Like, watch another game in another series, they are allowing a high degree of contact on the perimeter. They're
Mm.
rewarding teams for playing physically. You can't hand check, but you can body. I mean, unless you're defending Luka Doncic, but you can body check, and that's what people are doing. If you're keeping your hands up and sliding your feet, they're giving the benefit of the doubt to the defense, certainly. And so we did a much better job of that, and that started from the jump. You saw like Rui out there, 35 feet extended, putting pressure on Anthony Edwards. Yeah, you might get blown by, but that leads to the third point, which is we did a really good job. And this is, again, something we did in that February 1 to March 8th or so stretch of zoning up on Minnesota's ball handlers. So Jaden McDaniels is not necessarily, I mean, he'll do it sometimes, but he's not necessarily a guy who is going to grab the ball, go one on one, break his man down, with he doesn't have like a super extensive bag to like break his man down on the perimeter, drive and create a shot for another player. The main guy on Minnesota who can do that is Anthony Edwards. And Anthony Edwards alluded to this in his post game comments, but every time, he caught the ball, our defense sort of zones up and around the paint and is ready for, the kickouts to shooters. We did this really, really well during that February stretch. We talked about it multiple times on this pod. I think I described it at that time, and honestly, this is what it looks like, right, sometimes when we do it. But it's like our defense in those situations, like almost presupposes that the initial guy is going to get blown by. Like the initial guy is
Mhm.
there to, like you said, in the case of Luca, like give a body bump. And slow the guy a little bit so that everybody else can sort of scramble and get to their new rotations. And those guys are like, second, third rotations have been extremely crisp.
Yeah.
Naz Reid had tons of wide open threes in the first game. Unsurprising. He knocked them down because he's like an elite shooter with a super quick release. Jaden McDaniels, not necessarily an elite shooter, but certainly a much, much improved shooter. And, if you give him wide open looks like we did in game one, he's going to knock him down. But neither of those guys had that much space. I think the key to winning this series is, if Anthony Edwards scores 30 points and has under 10 assists, that's probably a good sign for us. Julius Randle is not going to average 30 points a game in this series. And we saw like what Minnesota's offensive output looks like when you sort of focus in on Anthony Edwards and force other guys to score. Now somebody else
Yeah.
is going to score. Last night or game two, it was Julius Randle, and so he had almost 30. And maybe it'll be somebody else in game two, or three, it'll be McDaniels, or maybe it'll be Naz Reid again. But what you want to do is limit it so that there's not like four guys going off from Minnesota, and I
Yeah.
think we can do that. With our sort of zone scheme. So it works. It definitely works what we're trying to do. Again, the question though is like Minnesota's bread and butter is defending physically. It sort of reminds me of those old, I mean, many teams have done this over the years, but like the Memphis grit and grind era, the Utah Jazz were sort of famous for this during the Darren Williams, Carlos Boozer era. These teams set such a high standard for the physicality in the game from the jump that, you know, and you sort of sympathize for the ref, or at least I sympathize for the refs a little bit in these situations because it's like, what is a foul? You can't stop the game every 3 seconds.
Yeah.
And so that's why I used to think this all the time, like when we used to play at Utah in those hostile environments when Utah was good back in the day, like how it's so hard to win against these teams who set the bar for physicality this high because it just sets such a high baseline that they get away with more. And that's fine, by the way. That's their style. As long as both teams are allowed to play that way, right? We don't have as many guys who have reputations for playing physically. Like LeBron is not going to get called for as many fouls as Rui, as even Gabe, as Austin, certainly. These types of guys are like who the refs are going to look to in this like chaotic mess of physical contact somebody has to get called for a foul occasionally. And that's my concern, is that, we don't have the same reputation guys that Minnesota has and that some of these other elite defensive teams have. And so are we going to get the same benefit of the doubt? I'm not totally sure. And I know this maybe to Minnesota fans would sound like a homery take, but I mean, look, it is the reality. Like, watch how Luke is being defended, right? I'm not complaining about it. If that's how the series is going to go, that's fine. Notwithstanding the way he's been defended, he's averaging 34 points a game in the series so far.
Yeah.
So, he will be, and he's shooting like 60%. So he'll be fine. He'll play through it. He'll have his share of turnovers because he's being held on the perimeter 40 feet away from the rim. But he will be fine. Just let us defend those guys the same way. And I think in game two, I'm not saying they didn't in game one. We just didn't show up to play that kind of
Yeah.
defense. In game two, we did show up and we did play that defense, and the refs allowed it. If the refs will continue to allow it, I think we'll be fine defensively. But, we talked about sustainability, but that really is my second concern.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of like you're concerned about what happened to Jackson Hayes extending out to Rui Hachimura and Austin Reeves, right? Where, yeah, those guys can rise up to the level of physicality, but they don't have the reputation. So the benefit of the doubt is not going to be on their side. Luckily, this is where I want to transition and segue to Rui. Luckily, Rui was able to play physical last night. And when him, LeBron, and DFS are locked in the way that they're locked in, putting reputation to the side, whatever. I I think we match up pretty well against this team, pound for pound, because the one thing that we have against Rudy, even though we don't necessarily have the size, is that 7-footer is not going to want to crouch down. We have the mobility on our side when we decide to be that scrappy and handsy and chippy. And Rui Hachimura, he was out for the game for maybe, I don't know, like a good 8 minutes of the game, trying to get fitted for a mask or whatever. Even with that said, his defensive versatility last night, it's probably the best I've seen from Rui in a playoff game. I think we've seen flashes of this, like one game here, one game there throughout like a regular season game. But in a playoff game, him being this locked in, whether it was on ball or off ball, and him being this in sync with regards to where to be on the court, where to funnel guys, his head was on a swivel. And I think the biggest thing for me was this is the most revved up I've seen Rui's motor. Like sometimes it was to his detriment where he'd still kind of like fall for a pump fake, but there were also moments where it was like, oh, Rui stayed down on this shot and just forced Julius Randle into a tough fadeaway, or Rui pinched out to Julius Randle on the baseline 3-point shot and just forced him to shoot with his hands in the air. And it was just, I don't know, it was a culmination of Rui's growth throughout the years in one game when the Lakers needed him the most. And I felt like he was the most modular, jack of all trades defensive player that the Lakers had. Obviously, he's not as good as LeBron James defensively when LeBron James wants to take it up a notch. He's not as, I don't know, fundamentally sound as DFS defensively, but he's kind of like the best of all worlds because he can move his feet. He's strong as hell. When he's giving those second and third efforts for the rebound or to contest a shot, Rui's a scary dude, man. And it's almost like a refined version of Randall who just decided to be a defender when Rui plays this way. So, any thoughts on Rui's defensive performance last night?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, I'll point back to that same stretch I keep referencing. I mean, there were games in there where we told Rui, I mean, there was that big Denver game, where we beat Denver and, again, we felt like we were getting the monkey off our back. Luca had it was like with Luca, and we were like, okay, this is not the same matchup as it was in prior years, but a big part of that game was the way that Rui and LeBron handled Jokic, and it was mostly Rui. Like you said, he's shown it in flashes. I don't think I've seen it in a playoff series. Again, like you said, I against Denver last year, I thought Rui was a huge weak link for us defensively. He was
Mm-hmm.
falling asleep off the ball. Michael Porter, got a ton of threes. I think there was that famous. I think he was involved in this clip, but it was like that clip of I think it was game one where we were winning and or it was a tie game late in the game, and Torian Prince is like pushing Rui in the back, trying to get him to like extend out because Porter is like clearly about to walk into a wide open three, and Rui's just like, looking around like he has no idea what's going on. So, JJ had his, I think, was directing part of his frustration with that famous third quarter timeout at Rui. And sometimes Rui needs the reminder still, and that's fine. But to your point, I think like consistently over the course of the game, he really brought it. And Rui historically has been the type of player who, you know, he breaks his nose, or I don't even know what happened to him, to be honest, that required that mask, but whatever happened, like that was the type of play that would normally and historically like knock Rui out. Not literally, but like he would come back and
Yeah.
not be the same player. Like he would be distracted, and he's, I mean, he's a role player. He's not an NBA All-Star. He's got flaws, and he's one of these guys who a little thing could sort of knock him off his best game.
Well, he also wasn't playing well offensively. He started the game off very slow, and yet his defense just kept ratcheting up. And then in the third quarter and fourth quarter, he got those like easy alley oop lay ins. He cut baseline for an and one layup. He hit that mid range jump shot on Rudy Gobert, and
Exactly.
everything
That's
sort
the
of
one I
fell
was
into place.
thinking. Exactly, exactly. So, if he can keep that up, that's going to be great. I mean, we're going to need in this series. This is like crazy how competitive the West is. It's like you have to win 3 Western Conference finals to make it to the finals, but it's like, you know, I mentioned this earlier, but Minnesota got like a Jaden McDaniels Naz Reid game in game 1. They might get another one of those from, maybe not in the same night, but they probably will get another night from those guys later in the series. Are we going to get an Austin game where he scores 25? Are we going to get a Rui game where he scores 25? Like, I don't know. Like, Luke is going to be there. LeBron. I don't know if LeBron's going to have a 30-point game in this series because of what we're asking him to do defensively, but you figure he'll have a game where his perimeter shot is falling, and that takes some pressure off his legs, and he can just sort of focus on shooting from the perimeter. So maybe that works out. But the point is, we're going to need a role player game where multiple non-Luca and LeBron guys step up. And so we'll see. But yeah, Rui's effort has been amazing in this, at least in game 2, it was amazing. His rebounds went up from game 1, still not like super high, but he was like in there mucking it up, which is all you can ask for. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think Rui is in the bucket of guys who, and we have a lot of these guys on our team who sort of need to feel his way into a game, and I think now in the playoffs into a series. And hopefully now that the standard has been set for what kind of physicality we're going to have in this series, Rui will be at that level for the rest of the games.
Yeah, for sure. All right, really quickly, last point. Offensively, what did the Lakers do that you liked from game 1 to game 2? Because Luka Doncic was again everything, except this time, as opposed to game 1. I know the usage numbers came out and the amount of passes he made came out, and it's not too dissimilar from what he normally does. But I just felt like in this game, obviously he had a season low 1 assist last game, but in this game he had 9 assists, and it just felt like the offense was moving a lot more fluidly, and there was a lot more play calling and organized sets, a lot more off ball screening actions to get guys on the move or to get guys free. Where Luka, even though he was still doing one on one stuff, even though he was still ISOing and forcing Rudy Gobert to dance his little ass off out there were more guys moving off ball that he could outlet to. You know what I mean? And this is without Jackson Hayes as well. And so the Lakers, who had a season low 15 assists last game, they had 23 assists this game. Felt like it should have been more if their offense hadn't sputtered out in the third and fourth quarter. But regardless, I just thought the Lakers had a much more kind of like their defensive game plan. They had a much more purposeful and intentional offensive game plan, one that had a structure behind it so that guys didn't have to just continually freelance and matchup hunt. And lo and behold, once you have that structure around you, Tommy, you will get those moments when we had that ISO with Austin Reeves where he actually finally cooked Rudy Gobert into the paint for the lay-in, right? He used his speed against Gobert. And also to that point, I really like that Austin sort of stopped settling for 3-point jump shots and just started to leverage his speed and take it to the basket. But overall, for me, offensively, I just like that we had a structure and foundation to fall back on, and there were different off ball screening actions to get LeBron James on the move in the mid range. He'd pop out and then hit this nice mid range jump shot. And it just felt more fluid. But yeah, what about you?
Uh, yeah, I think everything you said I agree with, and I think it can sort of be summarized by our group has consistently, I mean, consistently looked better when we run more organized sets. I'm not saying we need to like bring this to like Dan Hurley UConn level where it's every single time you're running a preset play called by the coach on the sideline. Like, but there's got to be some balance. We go through some of these stretches where it devolves a little bit too much into ISO. I one thing I want to point out on that front is there's been a lot of stats flying around about what our numbers look like in isolation against Rudy Gobert. Those numbers are obviously misleading. It's something like, oh, Luca and LeBron combined for 1 for 6 and 4 points on Rudy Gobert switches in game two. And I'm like, okay, that's if you look at the basketball breakdown numbers that track all relevant details, including fouls, including passes to wide open shooters, the points per possession we're getting on those Rudy Gobert switches are 1.2, which is very good for
Mhm.
this kind of defensive opponent. So, please, I guess maybe that's like propaganda being pushed by the Lakers so that Minnesota continues to switch those matchups. But we will gladly take those, and I'm happy to matchup hunt in those situations. But the one concern that I have about our offense is, you know, they're not calling as much contact at the paint unless you're getting absolutely hammered. Uh, they're certainly not calling it on drives, and I'll say that goes on both sides. They're not calling it a lot on drives. And had that huge dunk over Hayes that he probably got fouled on, and they didn't call it. Um, I think you know this is like this is a problem with this like new era of analytics in basketball. We have a lot of guys who are pretty adept at shooting in the mid range. I mean, Luca is a good mid range shooter. Luca can shoot from anywhere. Austin is not a bad mid range shooter. Rui is a good mid range shooter. LeBron is not a bad mid range shooter. Like, we have guys who can hit from that range, and I think that the over driving is starting to become like a little bit of a problem for us. We're getting into the paint and we have nowhere to go because there's so much length on Minnesota. And the one critique sort of have here is, when we do get these ISO matchups, I think we need to exploit them for perimeter shots more so than trying to beat Rudy Gobert off the dribble and get into the lane, because it doesn't matter if you beat Rudy Gobert off the dribble most of the time. Sometimes, yeah, you can get right by him and get a layup, but most of the time, Minnesota has Julius Randle, Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid. I mean, multiple other huge guys with strength who are there to, sort of give a hit at the rim. So I think we need to go back to more perimeter shooting as opposed to, and I'm not saying threes necessarily, but as opposed to over driving and trying to force the issue, because the foul calls are not coming on those types of plays on both sides.
Yeah, I'm okay with driving if you're patrolling the paint and you know how to use that Nash dribble and you're waiting for cutters. But to your point, it does get a little bit clogged up. I think the Lakers did a better job last night of getting guys the ball in the post in the triple threat position, whether it was LeBron. I'm still holding out hope. I'm still waiting for Jackson Hayes to not get in foul trouble so that we actually have a north to south downhill roll threat that can really open things up as a release valve, because that's the one dynamic we don't have right now that the Mavericks hammered home against the Timberwolves last season with Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford. I know they're different quality of players than Jackson Hayes, but in terms of that lob vertical threat, we literally do not have that, Tommy. The second play out of last night was a LeBron James pick and roll to Jackson Hayes for an alley oop layup. Do you remember that? And then Jackson Hayes got called for 2 fouls. I was starting to feel very hopeful. I was like, oh, here we go. We're going to be intentional about this. And then I think from that point on, and because JJ has such a short leash with Jackson, it kind of mentally Jackson was out of the game from there. He was doing a bunch of stupid stuff, and it was probably fair for Redick to shorten his minutes. But we're talking about hoping that Rui has a Rui game. Austin has a breakout Austin game. I'm holding out hope for a Jackson Hayes 6 of 6 game where we just absolutely take advantage of Rudy Gobert staying locked in on Luka or LeBron, because I think it's possible if Jackson can get his head on straight, and the right sort of opportunity presents itself. But I guess don't hold your breath on that point. But with that said, that'll do it for this episode. I think game 3 will tell us a lot about where this series is going to go and how up to the task the Lakers are, especially in Minnesota. Now that the atmosphere has shifted and like the refs have been hearing all this stuff about how they called the game in favor of the Lakers, are the Lakers going to be able to overcome sort of the natural overcompensation that's likely going to happen? This is what happens in every playoff series. Look, at the end of the day, I'll say this: it's not fun to watch. Aesthetically, it's not fun to watch, but if you're a basketball purist and you like the ground 'em, pound 'em, brawl esque fashion of the NBA, we are here. Kind of reminds me of Lakers Detroit. Is that what? Is that subconsciously what you're thinking about? Where you're like, I don't know if we've got the we've got the guys to go up against this team, because it just seems so much more natural for them to play this sort of way. But we shall see. I still think the Lakers have basketball IQ and scheme ability on their side, and obviously high top tier talent like LeBron James and Luka Doncic, who I trust more. But yeah, Game 3 will tell us a lot. With that said, that'll do it for this episode. Thank you guys for listening. Follow us on Twitter /X at Lakers Legacy Pod. Please also subscribe to our YouTube channel, same name. And please give us a 5-star rating and review on the Apple Podcast app and Spotify app. And with that said, go Lakers. Hopefully we win game 3 in Minnesota. And Tommy, I will catch you later.
Peace.
See ya.